Hello.
Hi, everyone. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
So for some reason, my video won't start, but.
Oh, no, Dino. You guys just imagine Dino.
Yes,
Very
well,
handsome. He's coming soon, I'm sure.
I am coming soon.
Oh,
Hey,
there
I
you
think I'm coming right now. And I have lots of books behind me. Yeah, no, I'm good.
We'll imagine. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Dupree, and welcome to our 15th annual Lit Fest, our first annual, no, just kidding, our first ever and last virtual Lit Fest. We're so happy you could make it out today, and we're going to be talking about that kind of paradoxical situation with writers, that it's both a very solitary art and one that requires, kind of by definition, social aspect. I mean, at least between writer and reader, but usually there's a greater one, as anyone who's been to Lighthouse knows. So we're going to be discussing that tonight. Mostly our panelists, I think, will be in conversation with each other, but I will swoop in once in a while, kind of Anderson Cooper style, and just pose a new question and then get them talking again. But before we do that, I want to thank a few people. We'd like to thank the Scientific, Cultural, and Facilities District, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Bonfils-Stanton Foundation, and Colorado Creative Industries for helping us make LitFest 2020 the virtual edition. And also all of you for being game to participate via the other side of this Zoom. I know it's not what we all had in mind, and watching that slideshow, I was just thinking, gosh, I miss that. I miss being outside and with people. I know you can still go outside, but outside with people and under the tent and on the porch, and too many people per square inch. It all works for me. We'll appreciate it more next time, I think. So all of you who are attending tonight, notice you're not on screen and you're not on mic. You can still communicate with us via the Q&A down at the bottom of your screen. You could submit questions and I will infiltrate the conversation and pose those questions at times when I can. We don't usually get to all of them, which is no commentary on the quality of your questions. So we'll get to as many as we can. And in the interim, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our beautiful panel here and pose a first question, and then I'll vamoose. Okay, so let's start with Nadia Bolz-Weber. She's the author of 3 New York Times bestselling memoirs: Pastrix, The Cranky, Beautiful Faith of a Saint and Sinner, a Sinner and Saint, sorry, Accidental Saints, Finding God in All the Wrong People, and more recently, Shameless, A Sexual Reformation. She is the host of The Confessional with Nadia Bolz-Weber, a podcast presented by The Moth. Apparently a recent guest was our visiting author, Melissa Febos, who was here a couple weeks ago. Nadia travels domestically and internationally as a speaker and has been featured on NPR's Morning Edition, On Being with Krista Tippett, Fresh Air, CNN, and in the Washington Post, Bitch Magazine, The New Yorker, and The Atlantic. Erika Krouse has 2 books forthcoming from Flatiron Books: Tell Me Everything, a memoir of a private eye, and Save Me, a collection of short stories. Her memoir in progress has been optioned by Playground Entertainment. Erika's novel Contenders was a finalist for the VCU Cabell First Novelist Award and appears in German with, don't hate me for my pronunciation, Aufbau Verlag. Her previous short story collection, Come Up and See Me Sometime, won the Patterson Fiction Award and was a New York Times Notable Book of the Year and is translated into 6 languages. Erika's work has appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, Esquire.com, Granta.com, Plowshares, The New York Times, One Story, and elsewhere. Dino, Enrique Piacentini, down at the bottom, has taught creative writing at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, the University of Houston, the Bold-Faced Emerging Writers Conference, and Imprint Houston, also Lighthouse Writers Workshop. And his writing has been published in several journals and newspapers, including the Massachusetts Review, The Globe and Mail, Gulf Coast Online, and Confrontation. He was fiction editor at Gulf Coast, a journal of literature and fine arts. Before becoming a writer, he worked in San Francisco as an arts administrator at the Asian Art Museum, the Mexican Museum, and Galeria de la Raza, and as a visual and media arts curator. He earned his MFA at the University of Houston, where he was an Imprint C. Glenn Camber MD Anderson Foundation Fellow. He currently lives in Denver and is working on his novel. And last but not least, Elizabeth Robinson is the author of over a dozen volumes of poetry. Her most recent books are 3 novels, Counterpart and Blue Heron. Robinson's mixed genre meditation On Ghosts was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Award. In addition, she has been a winner of the National Poetry Series, the Fence Modern Poets Prize, and the Foundation for Contemporary Arts Grants to Artists Award. She is a 2016 recipient of a Dora Maar Brown Foundation Fellowship to France. Robinson has taught at the Iowa Writers Workshop, the University of Montana, the University of Colorado Boulder, and Lighthouse Writers Workshop. We're so pleased to have you all here. What an incredible group. Maybe friends to one another and mentors to one another. We'll find out. But I'm going to remove myself from the conversation, but I want to start by asking each of the panelists to reflect on a particular mentor or friendship, or maybe they acted as a mentor to another writer that has been meaningful to them, and maybe just share a little story about that. Does anybody feel like starting, or should I call on someone? How about Dino? Because you were the last to arrive.
I know, the one having the most Zoom issues. Well, okay, it pays to be a computer idiot. So I actually thought about, it was not the question I was considering originally when I sort of heard about this panel, The Anxiety of Influence. But this morning, I was thinking about, well, who are some of the folks who really mentored me? And actually, Andrea, the first person who kind of came to mind was you, I've got to say. I started writing sort of a second career, fiction writing. I didn't write my first short stories until I was in my mid-30s, actually. And I was living in Denver, and I took a workshop with Andrea Dupree. And it was fantastic. And I think the thing that was really great was that just the encouragement, which I think is something that's very important. I think that's our first sort of experience with a possible mentor, is we have somebody who's actually very encouraging of our writing. But I mean, the other thing that I think made it work for me was that Andrea is so great, as many of us know, and charming and funny, and has remained a friend. I mean, this was in the early 2000s. And then I moved away from Denver, moved back to San Francisco, where I'm from, and but I kept in touch. And Andrea has played a role, I think, in my sort of journey, this path as a writer, this vocation. She wrote me a rec letter for getting into an MFA program. When I came back here to Denver, it's been 2 years now. I immediately got in touch with her, and she was great. She helped me sort of get a sense of lay of the land. And last year, she hired me to start teaching at Lighthouse again, which had been fantastic. So I think Andrea is actually a really great example of somebody who's been very generous as a mentor. And I think when I thought about other mentors that I've had, I think the thing that the commonality is they're also people I also really like and have kept as friends. So that yes, they're these mentors, but they're also in many ways peers and colleagues. They're good friends, people I really just enjoy being around. And so I'm not just always approaching them asking for a favor, but I'm also just approaching them because I want to hang out with them. So yeah. Hey, there she is.
Shucks, Dino, your 20s in the mail. Erika or Nadia, I noticed one of you unmuting.
Oh, I did. Yeah.
How about you go?
So I think I might have been the person who suggested this topic as a panel originally, just because I think a lot of times in writing circles, because what we're doing is so sort of ourselves and so vulnerable, it can feel like there's a scarcity of opportunity or success or, you know, agents or publishing contract or whatever. And so I think that it's easy to feel competitive or jealous. And so my experience is that I had a couple older women who really brought me along and were just completely for me. And it changed my life because I didn't, I'm a late bloomer, so I didn't go to college shows. I didn't graduate college show I was 36, and I started college in my 30s. And so I didn't even mean to start college. I just took this community college class because it was film studies, because I loved movies. And I never did well in school. I graduated with like a 2.0 in high school, and I never had any success. And I was terrified of writing. And I took this film studies class at Lane Community College in Eugene, Oregon. It was a night class. And this woman, Susan Glasso, was the teacher. And I was just taking it because I like to talk about movies. And then I come home after the first day, and my ex-husband, my then husband, said, "Did you get a syllabus?" And I didn't even know what that word meant. And I go, "I'm not sure what that means." And he goes, "Did they give you a piece of paper?" I'm like, "Yeah." And I give it to him. He's looking over it and he goes, "Oh, well, you only have to write 2 like 5-page papers." And I said, I might have to drop the class. I mean, I can't do that. And I met with my teacher, Susan Glasso, and I said, "Can I just do them orally? I don't even care about getting credit. I just like talking about movies, and I can't write." I mean, it's not that I'm illiterate, it's that I sound illiterate when I write. And so she said, "Well, why don't you just try it and see how it goes?" And so I wrote a paper on The English Patient. It was the year that movie came out. And my ex-husband had to hold my hand the whole time. I was terrified. And I gave it to her, and I kind of stumbled along in the class, and she called me into her office at the end of the term, and she said, "Nadia, I was reflecting on our conversation at the beginning of the term," and she said, "I just feel like it might be important for you to hear me say that, you know, I've taught college for 20 years, and you're one of the smartest students I've ever had." And I said, "Wow, you've had really stupid students." But she said I was smart, and it changed everything in my whole life for this older woman to see something in me that I didn't see in myself and to put words on it. And after that, I was like, well, fuck it, I'm smart. I can do anything. Right then, I was like unstoppable. Just took one person to say it. And I didn't even intend to be a writer, but then, you know, I had these opportunities, and this woman named Sarah Miles, again, like 10 years older, she had written books, and she really believed in my voice, and she helped me along. And I had a woman who hooked me up with my first literary agent. I just had people sort of pulling me along. And because of the economy of that, I just believed that it was my responsibility to keep doing the same thing, especially for women. And so it's been a joy over the past 10 years to do everything I can to help a certain group of women, especially women who have more marginalized voices. And this woman, Rachel Held Evans, who is also a memoirist in my little subculture, she died a year ago, but we started a conference together, and the whole point was to say, hey, people are listening to us in our little subculture. Maybe it's our responsibility to use that to get them to listen to other voices that aren't normally listened to. And so we'd curate a list of speakers. People would buy tickets because we were on it, because it was our conference. But then we'd put these other women on and trans people on stage, and mostly women of color. And and the whole thing was like, rather than being nervous that someone's going to come up behind us and eclipse us at some point, we wanted to manufacture that happening. Like, we wanted to do everything we could to make that happen. And one of those women, the first year, is Austin Channing Brown, and her book, I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness, she wrote 2 years ago. She's been in my life. We have matching tattoos. We've been in my life for a long time. And it's been on the New York Times bestseller list for the past 3 weeks. And so I'm like, go, 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 you know, like it's thrilling. It's thrilling. So I just believe in that it's not, we can't think of scarcity when it comes to this, that there's room for so many different voices. And if somebody has kind of pushed you along, it's like our responsibility to do the same for others. So it's changed my life, and it's given me incredible friends sort of moving through the world in this way. So that's me.
Elizabeth or Erika, do either you want to? Erika, do you want to go?
I was just going to say, Elizabeth, do you want to go? Yeah.
Let me just close my window. Okay. So as a poet, I think the stakes and the culture are kind of different, and that, you know, like contracts and agents are not a part of my life. And I've been writing poetry since I was a wee tiny person. So the way I think about mentorship is often in terms of community, and that's incredibly central to me. I think that we all make art, whether we think about it that way or not, in community, and mentorship can create community and create permissions and enlarge community. I'm thinking, what I thought about in relation to this was my undergraduate teacher. I went to Bard College, which is about 150 miles up the Hudson from New York City. And at the time that I was there were 600 students and one poet. He was the guy. And so he held disproportionate influence. And all I wanted to do was be a poet and be with these other writers and people making paintings and dancing, and which it was quite great that way. And he was, on the one hand, incredibly generous, just taught me about revision, made endless lists of books for me to read. And really, I think because Bard was so defined as an experimental community, invested in experimental writing, he was like, don't worry about being published. What you should be doing is starting your own magazines, your own presses, your own reading series. And that has just been foundational as a word of advice and an empowerment. So that's what I did. And my ethos has really become as a result of that, though I'm fundamentally an introvert, that you don't wait to be invited to the party. You have the party and you invite other people. And that has just given me an incredible, vital community for life. And I think it also emphasizes process over product, that we are transcending genre and media boundaries. We're working together. We are creating the larger art. And there's even a kind of religious joy to that. And then I will say also, that teacher, who is still alive and writing really gorgeous poems, he was an ideal mentor in so many ways. He inducted me into this vivid, dynamic community that informs my everyday life now. Except that he was not always an ideal mentor. He was also an unremitting sexual harasser who grabbed me by the breasts, grabbed me by the thigh, told me I was frigid when I wouldn't have sex with him, and that I was boring and bourgeois when I said, you should come to class and to the meetings where I've been waiting for you. And he could readily recognize the gifts of his female students, but that often became kind of acquisitive, like, oh, I like your work, so I want your body. And I saw his male students getting published more readily. going to graduate school, moving on in ways that felt more fully authorized. And that to me is the anxiety and joy of mentorship and influence, because I think that influence is a tricky process. And I think it is a process, perhaps by necessity. It's hard to establish boundaries when you are a mentor or a mentee. And I now really try to take mentoring seriously because I see my amazing students, and I have had amazing students at the Lighthouse, but they become part of my long-term community. And have I ever felt a little twinge of envy when one of my students gets a big old prize? Sure. But I also feel so proud and excited and feel that it's my community that's winning and being recognized and celebrated. And I know that her award is good for all of us who take poetry seriously. So my former teacher, he was incredibly generous, genuinely generous, and a shithead. And I think he's just like all humans in that regard. He influenced me profoundly. Despite all this, I'm still friends with him because that's the way I see influence, as taking the good and the bad and being reciprocal. I think that if we see community as key to influence, then his power over me as an individual is limited. And I have watched poetry scenes come under kind of cult leadership or get dogmatic and oppressive. But then there's always somebody who breaks out and forges new ground that we can all play on and make art with. So removing or at least limiting the power of a single mentor, I think, enables us to broaden what we can do. And then in closing, I'll just say, though he is perhaps the most ambivalent mentor exemplar, if there ever was one, Ezra Pound talked about how we all need to keep doing our best, together, alone, in community, because even if what we produce is ultimately kind of mediocre, we might just be doing something that paves the way for the next artist who creates something truly astonishing and transformative. And I like Uncle Ez for that reason. So.
Elizabeth, I'm so sorry. First, that's just incredibly shitty.
Yeah, well, welcome to the universe. I mean,
well,
people have not had that, but
right,
anyway.
Right. So I'm really grateful for this after your story, Elizabeth, because I actually haven't really had many mentors coming up because because no one really liked my writing very much, and I'm not being like fake modest. In graduate school, really like I had two teachers who kind of tolerated it, and they were great but I had a lot of people writing stuff in my work saying like, why are you making us read this shit and stuff like that. So and there was a poetry teacher. I started studying poetry and I kind of got hazed out, but I moved to Boulder to study with this one poet who she ended up saying, just her advice to me was, stop writing poetry, just stop. And then she said, why don't you just go write fiction or something? Which, in the end I ended up doing, and, no offense to the super lucrative world of poetry, but I have not looked back. So I think I found like my mentorship has always been kind of, my mentorship from above has usually been through insults and negative examples that have actually, and I'm going to come back to this in a second, but they've actually in some ways been more helpful than the positive stuff. But the positive mentorship I've really gotten has been from Lighthouse. And just to make Andrea really squirm, that's due to Andrea. She hired me here. I didn't really know Lighthouse, and I think pretty much every good thing that's happened in my writing I can say is directly attributable to Lighthouse. And it's, for me, this community has been just the most meaningful, intricate, multifaceted, and dynamic writing community I've ever had the privilege of being part of. So I know it's changed my life, and I really don't know what kind of writer I would be without it in it. I'm also in 2 writing groups. And again, that's like in some ways, I feel like this is where a lot of my mentorship comes these days. Both of the writing groups are fueled by Lighthouse faculty members. There's a total right now of 9 other writers that we meet in the 2 groups, which means I read a lot of their work and they read a lot of mine. And my continuing education pretty much comes from them. But this for me is how valuable they are. I just finished a draft of my memoir, and it turns out that most of the people in one of the groups, they were finishing books too. So one person said, why don't we just read each other's books in turn? So I had, at the very time that I needed it, 4 intricate, intelligent groups of feedback from 4 amazing, writers, readers, teachers, writing teachers. And that alone set me a whole draft ahead, I feel like. So when I turned it into my editor, I felt like I was already further along than I would ever possibly be otherwise, that's an invaluable gift. It's an immeasurable gift. But not everyone in my writing groups has supported my work. So I do want to talk briefly about the value of negative feedback as well. I had in one group, one writer would say things like, you're going for pathos, but this is just bathos. And his feedback was just spangled with his scorn and exclamation points. I hope he's not listening to this. But if I would turn down the volume just a little bit, I found that he was right about certain things, and he was speaking that kind of truth that only someone who really dislikes you would bother to tell you. So I kind of feel like you can get mentorship wherever you need it. And for me, I don't want to let time go by before we do acknowledge that our ultimate mentorship is, I think, the thing that's been mentoring us maybe since we were young, which are the books themselves, right? These books that we love, that we want to be buried with, that have taught us so much in our lives. So I think as a writer, it's your job to find mentorship, from life, from your community, maybe from, a teacher, if you can find one who likes what you're doing, but also from these amazing books and these amazing writers, and of course from Andrea. No, she's not going to come back on screen. There you are.
I just have to laugh. Doesn't it look like I stacked the panel?
It does.
I honestly, you guys warm my heart, and I feel like you're all my mentors. So thank you for that. I wanted to intrude with a question from the Q&A, and that is, can you all speak about it? This kind of relates to what the story Elizabeth told, but can you speak about a time when a fellow writer or literary citizen really burned you? Did it impact your work and or output? Is it still affecting you? And how did you cope with it socially and or artistically?
Can I just speak, because I saw Rachel Peterson's question too? I think it's a really good question. She asked, if I stayed friends with this guy who is really an abuser in a sense, am I modeling that for people? So I should also clarify that I filed a complaint against him, and he knew it at the institution that I was at, and we duked it out. So I was not a passive recipient of that, and I would never, ever suggest that people just accept that kind of abuse. But what I was trying to point out was the complexity and stickiness of the mentor-mentee relationship, because on some level, he really, really wanted to help his writers. And in some ways, that was just unacceptable. He did eventually apologize to me, which is why I feel like I can continue to be friends with him. But I guess I want to say, it's complicated, and the good and the bad can really coexist. And maybe part of our community building is having people stand with us when we try to negotiate those things, because the other women that I was students with were saying, yeah, he's doing that to me too, and it's not okay. So I hope that clarifies that. I would not want anybody to feel like I was saying, oh, to forward your writer's life or your artistic life, you should let somebody grab your breasts, because that's really not what I'm saying. Anyway.
I guess to speak to the you know, and I agree with Elizabeth, and I guess to speak to the other question about like, how do you basically take that, you know, I mean, not everyone's going to be for you, right? Not everyone's going to be like supporting you. And some people see writing as a competitive sport, and they think that if, you know, if I tear down this person in my workshop, that'll kind of get me closer to publication, which is absolutely ludicrous. Because there's just so many people, right? And even if that were a way to behave. But I think there's a certain kind of attitude you have to cultivate as a writer, because there's a lot of rejection in writing in general. So I think I don't know, I just decided at one point that I was going to take on this, like, how do you like me now attitude? You know, you're going to reject something and send something more, you know, you're going to tear me down and you throw something more in your face. And I think it's not easy. And it takes a long time, and you have to build up some calluses, but I do think it's something to aspire to, is just to not expect people to praise you. And I think you know, when I write, I assume that someone really would rather be doing something else other than reading my work. And I think it brings a little bit of urgency to the writing. I know that's not pleasant. It's not like, you know, taking a bath in the warmth of approval that people imagine writing is, but I think writing's more like fighting, and you've got to just sort of, you know, duke it out to get your voice out there. And again, it's not something that you go into your first workshop being able to do, but I think it's something that you can slowly build up over time until you're really tough enough to do that, and to take on the you know, the negative feedback and to turn it around as something positive in your life.
I can say that I'm a lightning rod for conservative Christians, and so there is a lot available to read online if you don't like me. I mean, there's so much that you can consume of other people's opinions of me. Literally, my actual name is a URL that somebody bought, and it's nothing but shit about me. So so there's so much of that out there that I've had to manage because of the work that I put out, that I did have somebody who was a friend of mine. I preached at his wedding, like we were really close, who I know a lot about his own sort of personal story. And he decided to publish a piece in a Lutheran theological journal that was a huge critique against my last book. And it stung in a way that the guy who owns the URL that's my name, I don't give a shit. I don't know that guy. It doesn't, you know, I mean, it doesn't feel great, but to have it be somebody I know, and to know that I would never do that to a friend. But I guess I thought it gave him some credibility with some of my other critics, and maybe that was important for his career. I'm not sure, but when it was personal like that, and it was something that I would never reciprocate, I wouldn't do that to a friend, even if I didn't agree with their work. So that one was hard, and I don't think I've actually gotten over that one. So, but this also, like my fans and my detractors, I realized, are both really passionate groups of people who are equally distant from the truth. And so I don't find either one of the groups to be reliable sources of information to myself about myself or my work. So I try to not be terribly privy to what either group is saying about me and my writing, because I don't find them to be accurate.
Yeah, I think, so one thing, Erika, that you mentioned that sort of spoke to me was when you have people who are really just negative about your work, they just don't like it. And it spurs something in you, I think, a little bit of the fighting spirit. I had one workshop in graduate school with a professor who I liked as a person. He was, I still like him as a person, but I will never forget. The story right before mine had a lot of sex, and he thought it was fantastic. It was great. My story had some sex, but it was gay sex. And immediately, I remember he asked me, he's like, you put in too much sex, which I think a lot of gay men have that experience in workshops. You put in too much sex. And then he said, I feel sorry for your husband, as if I was like, because my character was promiscuous, that my husband was, on the receiving end of that as well. And the thing is, you get these sort of personal experiences where people will, say things that are perhaps problematic or offensive, but you just have to, I don't know, I just feel like, you have to just put that in a box and put it away, and if you can. And I think the thing is, the thing that was interesting about that experience was this was somebody I thought that I was going to work with and have a really good relationship with, and was going to be a mentor. And I found actually out that, this straight white guy ended up being somebody who really believed in my work and was really supportive of it. So you'll find things that I think you'll find mentors in places that you don't expect. I had sort of an interesting experience I went to Serenity, and there was another a workshop leader. He was a great writer, terrific guy. Thought we'd connect in many ways, and we did personally. And it was interesting. In this workshop that I took, all the you selected a workshop leader. All the writers of color selected this guy because he was a writer of color and he was queer. But he was checked out. He wasn't interested. He was just gone. And interestingly enough, somebody who I wouldn't expect was the one who was sort of supportive of my work. So I think you kind of just have to find it where it comes to you. And it's going to surprise you where it comes to you. Somebody who's going to support your work and going to be going to say the right things. So I think you might go looking for mentorship, but it will come from all sorts of places that you aren't expecting. And then one other thing I wanted to say, Elizabeth, you talked about finding it in your community, and I think that's been a really big place for me. I met a lot of people in graduate school, and we're still, having Zoom meetings and working with each other. And the nice thing about it is also, I think, finding people who are, it's great to find a professor or an instructor or somebody who's published a lot who can give you advice. But there's also something very helpful about somebody who's sort of where you're at. Right now I'm at the point where, I had 3 or 4 friends who we were all like looking for agents together, and we were able to share our frustrations and our suggestions and our spreadsheets, all that kind of stuff. Now I'm with friends who are out there, their books are on market. So having that, having folks who are at the same place you're at, sort of in a way in the business itself, is really helpful. Those are mentors. You can really, they're incredibly valuable. Just honestly, your peers, I've found amazing support and guidance from people who are going through the same thing that I am at the same time, because somebody who's published a book or 4 books, and you're publishing your first, they may not remember that well what it was like to hunt for an agent, to try to land your book somewhere. So when you have folks who are kind of at the same place, really great. It's a community to hold on to. So yeah.
I have an odd question that I'd just love to pose to the group. What do you think the role is of social media in community building around writing? I know some people rely on it a lot and some people not at all. I was just wondering where you guys are on that.
I like to use social media to signal boost other writers. I would say primarily in terms of writing, that's how I use it. Just to sort of, I have a pretty large social media following, so if I can sort of leverage that to expose people to these other writers I really believe in, then I feel like I've used what I have well.
Do you feel like it builds community for you? Like, do you feel like you get something from it, or you know?
No, it's toxic.
I feel the same way.
No, I mean, social media giveth and social media taketh away. I have gotten community from those conferences I ran with Rachel Held Evans for those 5 years. The women, there's a group that's pretty tight. It's 12 women and 1 gay Chinese guy, and we're the ones with the matching tattoos. But so I didn't know that's what was going to happen when we started that whole project, and so it was this really lovely bonus, you know.
I have a kind of strange response to that, but I will never forget being on a poetry listserv on 9/11 and just having one of the moderators say, "Okay, poets, count off." And if we couldn't find somebody could go look for them. And it was such a really powerful and moving thing to feel like we're all dispersed across the country looking for a guy who worked on Wall Street for Deutsche Bank, making sure he got home. Or getting to somebody who needed to pick up their kid to see. It was incredibly moving. And I think that that's how these weird social media things that maybe some people use, you know, appropriately for publicity can also have really practical community building applications. And before I moved to California the last 6 years, some people know that I was working with people who are living on the street, and poets tend to be a poor bunch. So some of the things that I learned about getting housing or rent stabilization or whatever, I have actually people on Facebook would contact me and say, "Can you help this person?" And I think that those kinds of things are really powerful, and it's just makes it a lot easier no matter where you are to share resources and be in community. So.
Yeah, I think I'm sort of with Nadia. I'm not so great with social media. I find it a little toxic. I find it a little overwhelming, actually. You know, where there's so much there that I kind of can't take it in a way that doesn't leave me stressed out all day. Yeah, I mean, I used to plug friends' books, but I'm not sure it works so well for me, social media. Yeah, I think I want to sit down and write, or I want to talk to my friends. Yeah, and too often I see stuff on social media that I find if I respond to it, sometimes it'll blow my day. So yeah, I'm not a big social media fan. What about you, Erika?
Oh, I hate it. I think it's just like a bag of shit. I mean, like, but there's some good stuff on it, like those videos of cats and things. But as far as like, you know, building a community, I think something we're finding now is that, you know, it's great to have all these technological advances where we can actually communicate in a time of quarantine. I mean, I think when polio was going on, you know, people didn't have this at all, right? But I feel like it takes so much. It's like this suck, you know, you feel your soul just like sucking into the screen and you just can't get it back, for me. So I don't feel like I think a lot of people rely on it to build community, but they end up feeling really bad about themselves because social media, I think, exists to, you know, so people can brag about themselves. So I think people just end up feeling like diminished, you know, in a way where if you're in a party and someone starts acting like that, you know, you can just be like, you can see it for what it is, you know. So I I don't like it for community building. But I was wondering what you guys like besides Lighthouse, which is an incredible resource. Like, you know, I was thinking where can people look for community and for mentorship? And I was thinking, you know, like Lighthouse has all the programs like, you know, Book Project, Writing Color, Poetry Collective, Queer Creatives, you know, Hard Times, so many. But I'm wondering what other resources you think people can look to as far as, you know, to if they want to expand their writing community. And I was thinking like conferences, like writers conferences, like Dino, you mentioned Swanee, and retreats. You know, I think a lot of people go on, especially like I know Andrea's been to McDowell, if you're lucky enough to get into McDowell. But like I was wondering what other resources you guys look to.
Yeah, well, I'll mention, you know, I think writers' communities are a really terrific way of getting to know other writers. One thing I would warn people about, or just sort of caution people about it, if you go to one, and maybe I'm just easily overwhelmed. Social media, conferences, whatever. Go with a goal. I found that there were so many people for 2 weeks that it felt like being at a wedding reception for 2 weeks, where you're kind of meeting new people and you're having conversations, and then they're great, they're wonderful conversations, and the next day you're sitting at another table with somebody else. I went with a goal, and it ended up working very well for me. I knew what wasn't going to be important. I knew which talks I was going to go to, which readings. I wanted to get something in particular out of it, and I think that worked for me. But I feel like it can be they can be overwhelming. These sort of conferences. I mean, people who've been to AWP know how overwhelming that is. And of course, another place to go find people is, well, I'm going to plug Lighthouse, but the Book Project or graduate programs. I mean, my cohort of folks that I went to get my MFA with are, I mean, they're my people, they're my clique, and continue to, you know, we continue to read each other's work and sort of help each other through this sort of strange world of fiction writing and poetry writing as well. So yeah.
How about you guys, Nadia, Elizabeth?
It's just been serendipity for me. I mean, I met Sarah Miles in a field in England at a festival. Like, I didn't know who she was. She didn't know who I was. And we were at a meeting together the first night, and it was us and all these British people. And she was the only one who laughed at my jokes, and I was the only one who laughed at her jokes. So then we just kind of followed each other around for the rest of the festival, became friends. So it's been serendipity for me. I'm somebody who's found literary things very intimidating, and I'm very intimidated at literary events, and so they're just hard for me. I've never kind of felt like I was part of that scene. So I mean, when you say like going to a conference, it sounds exciting, but then I start feeling sick too. I get really nervous. So maybe if you guys know of one that would be a good fit, I'll try it. But yeah.
Because writers are shy, right? Like we're all kind of a little shy, which is why we write things down. It's like we're sending little messages in a bottle to the world, right? So then you expect us to find a community at a party. It's going to be like nearly impossible sometimes, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's this sort of interiority of being a writer, and then also just insecurity and just all of it. And so then it ends up just feeling magnified, and I feel intimidated and, you know, weird. So but maybe that'll be my goal this year, to go to like a literary thing.
How about you, Elizabeth?
I find I'm with Dino on conferences are just totally overstimulating, and I end up getting really bad migraines, so I don't do those anymore. But I've had really good experiences with writers' residencies or art like McDowell or Marin Headlands. I got to go to France on one, and I met, in each instance, really wonderful people that I that I have stayed in touch with, and I think part of what's been especially beneficial is that it takes me out of my writer world. And so I'm talking to painters and filmmakers and composers, and that's incredible and helpful in terms of my own work. But it's also, it's a longer term thing, so you can build a relationship and you can spend a lot of time alone and come out when you feel like it. So I highly recommend that. I think we should find more ways for people to do that. Maybe some of the Lighthouse retreat things function that way.
And I actually also want to add something. I want to maybe jump in on something that Erika had said earlier, where she goes to other books. I mean, we're writers, right? This is our world, right? We grew up, probably most of us grew up, not all of us, but probably most of us grew up reading and being fascinated and just loving this fictional worlds or poetry worlds or whatever, the worlds you find in books. And well, when the title of the panel was first I sort of saw it, Anxiety of Influence. I had a student at Urbana in Champaign. He was a normal kid, whatever. But in one of my classes, one of the things that they had to do was write sort of a literary biography. How did you come to writing? And in his, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but you don't know him. In his little biography, there was something about he doesn't read. He won't read because he was afraid that he would be influenced and not be his own original self. And I know, Erika's going, oh my God. And of course, that was my response, right? Oh my God, how can you be a writer and not read? And, one of the things I want to point out is that, we've got this great community and it goes back all the way to the beginning of writing. I mean, writing is in many ways a conversation, right? It's a conversation with writers in the past and writers in the future, as well as your readers. So I guess one of the questions I'd like to put forward to other folks on this panel, do you feel like you're in conversation with other writers, and how have you negotiated sort of the larger community of writers, maybe folks you don't know personally, but that you maybe feel like you have a relationship with? So, I mean, Erika, you want to start with you because
I mean, I feel like it's a one-sided relation. It's like, unrequited love on my part for these writers. I love these writers, and a lot of them are dead, so like I just tend to fall, because I kind of hate this century. But I think there's just like this feeling of like, it's like what you wanted to say, like maybe you read their work when you were 18 or 30 or 50 or whatever, and it's the thing you wanted to say to them then a little bit. You want to give something back to them that they gave to you in a way. But I do feel like I try to, like, I write up, you know what I mean? I'm not writing to appear. I'm trying to like speak to something larger than myself, and I think that helps the writing in general, because like I'm, trying to be smarter than I actually am. But I also, sometimes I feel like I'm writing also in rebuttal to someone, or to, I'm saying, no, you're wrong. Women are not just boobs and eyes, and is like, one of the things that I think maybe trying to say to some of those writers. But yeah, I do feel like it's this weird, you have these weird love affairs with these writers, and they'll never know, which is why, and speaking of the community piece, like I've just started doing this. I've just started, and I haven't actually mailed the letters yet, but I've just started writing letters to writers that I love, and I'm trying to work up the courage to mail them, to say like, I love your work. It's changed my life, and here's how. And I know that on the very rare occasions that I've gotten those letters, it's kind of a little bit like incredibly embarrassing and mortifying, and you don't really know what to say back. But I do feel like people do need to know. It's so solitary. This is such a solitary endeavor. We're writing love letters to the abyss, and And I do feel like it's important for people to know, like, hey, you changed my life. And just doing what you're doing, you changed my life. And you don't have to write me back, but like, you need to know that. But I don't want to derail your question, Dino, and how do other people feel about being in conversation with other writers? Nadia, Elizabeth?
I wrote a letter to Robert Creeley, who is like my favorite poet ever, my idol, and he wrote back. So, and he wrote back with like really attentive response to my work. So there's nothing that validates a young person that way. It just was incredibly powerful forever for me. So I'm so grateful for those instances. And I really experienced a huge amount of generosity from other writers. So I read other writers all the time to see what's possible, and I'm constantly surprised by what's possible. But I think that sometimes the most powerful conversations with other writers' work is with people who are my students, because I'm reading with a kind of intensity and intimacy that, you know, I can't always afford. If I'm reading a book and I'm thinking about the book, oh, I can go back to this. This is really interesting. With the student, it can be kind of time limited, and we have a shared goal. And I just have learned so much about writing that way. So I'm intensely grateful to my students for helping me to be a better writer and reader.
I'll just say that I pretty much only read outside the genre I write in, and that has always been the absolute most helpful for me in terms of like knowing what's possible. So I tend to not read in the same genre I write much, but I will read outside of it a lot.
You guys, this has been stunning and so generous. You're all generous human beings. And I feel like we're all left with a call to action, which is write love letters to the writers who have mattered to you, the mentors that have mattered to you. There's nothing wrong with putting some of that goodness out in the world. And also, you know, we have 1 week left of LitFest. If you want to come to some happy hours, please do. These are all free and open to everyone. We're taking little snippets of each day to celebrate literature and writing and sharing people's stories and listening and all of the things. Our final salon will be the creative intellectual, the intellectual creative, and that's featuring Elisa Gabbert, Khadijah Queen, Erika Worth, and Peter Parnell. These are all writers who do multiple things, and they also think, kind of like this panel tonight, you guys blow my mind. You're so talented, so generous, and so good at what you do, and thank you for that. All of you who were here, please give it up in your own place for this panel. Take care of each other and go hang out with some other writers, even if it's from your bookshelf. And until next time, keep writing, keep connecting, and we'll see you soon. Thanks you all.
Thanks,
to
Andrea. Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
Andrea.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.